Okay. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to this very special IIC Library webinar on Shalva Weil's book about Baghdadi Jews in India, maintaining community, negotiating identities, and creating, and creating diversity in India. I'm very happy to be hosting this very special IIC Library webinar with Shalva Weil and Sara Manasseh and Jael Silliman, who will be joining us shortly. I want to thank the India International Center for hosting another event about the Jews of Baghdad, the Baghdadi Jews who made their way to India in the 18th century. And I am very eager to hear the stories and the narratives that we'll be hearing over the next hour, led by Professor Shalva Weil and with Dr. Jael Silliman and Dr. Sara Manasseh. Sara has her own book out, which you may want to look up. It's called Ada, and it's about the communities of Calcutta. And maybe another time the IIC will, I'm wrong, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. It's Jael who has that book up. I'm sorry. I had my notes backward here. But I am looking forward to hearing the conversation up ahead of us. The Israeli Embassy is very happy to sponsor these events together with the India International Center. Our cultural department has been working all year. We have had a couple of events with Shalva over the past few months. We're very happy to be able to host these events with Shalva Weil, who is a brilliant scholar and has come out with books about the Baghdadi Jews and about other issues pertaining to Jewish communities in India and in other places around the world. So let's get started with no further ado. Shalva, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for that wonderful introduction. It's always a pleasure to work with the Israeli Embassy in India. And I'd like to thank the India International Center for hosting this event. My first introduction to the IIC was many years ago when I came out to India, I must confess, in the 1980s. And I came to visit my friend Jake. This was General Jacob, an Indian war hero who passed away in 2016. And Jake, or General Jacob, said that he would arrange for me to stay at the IIC because he was a member. And ever since then, I have held the IIC in total awe for the wonderful cultural events that they host. So the book that we're talking about today is on the Baghdadi Jews in India. There are lots of Jews in India, or there were, but of course their numbers were minuscule compared to the billions that there are in India itself, except that they left a huge impact on India. So my book that was published by Marg in 2002 was called India's Jewish Heritage and was devoted to three major Jewish communities: the Ben Israel of Maharashtra, the Cochin Jews of Kerala, and also the Baghdadi Jews. The Baghdadi Jews were only transient in India, and yet they left such wonderful monuments and such wonderful memories behind. And our book, which is entitled The Baghdadi Jews in India, Maintaining Communities, Negotiating Identities, and Creating Super Diversity, really commemorates the Baghdadi Jews in India because there are hardly any left. There's probably less than 100 Baghdadi Jews in India today. And yet lots and lots of Baghdadi Jews who come from all over the world come to visit the monuments and the synagogues that the Baghdadi Jews set up between approximately 1850 to 1950, let's say, within the period of about 100 years. And what other minority ethnic group has caused such a huge impact like the Baghdadis? All their edifices can be seen in Bombay and in Pune and in Calcutta to this day. So the book is dedicated to General Jacob, who was a very staunch Indian and a very loyal Jew. As many of you know, he negotiated the surrender of Pakistani forces in Dhaka in 1971, and this created what we now know as Bangladesh. In the 1990s, General Jacob joined the BJP party quite early on, and he became governor of Goa, and then afterwards he became governor of Haryana and Punjab. And then he spent his latter years in Delhi until he passed away, and he is buried in the Jewish cemetery in the Synagogue in Delhi, in Humayun Road. So the book that that was published by Routledge is dedicated to him, but is an edited volume with many contributors. And two of those distinguished contributors will be my interviewees today, and we'll chat about what they wrote about. So the first interviewee is Dr. Sara Manasseh, who was born in Bombay. And hopefully the second interviewee will be Dr. Jael Silliman, who currently resides in Kolkata. So before I introduce my guests and my now very great friends, I would like to explain to the audience who the Baghdadi Jews are. Now, I'll begin off by saying that the term Baghdadi Jews may be a misnomer, and Zara thinks it certainly is, because not all these Jews who came to India from the middle of the 19th century on actually came from Baghdad. They came from all sorts of places, from Basra and from Aleppo and even Yemen. We're using this as a collective designation of a group of people who were basically just over 100 years in India. So without further ado, I would like to share my screen with you and show you the very quick history of the Baghdadis in India. And after that, we will have our interviews and discussions. So this is the book that I showed you. And here is a wonderful photograph by India's top photographer, Sanjeet Chanduri, of General Jacob in his really iconic apartment in Delhi, so typical of him having tea. And this is what it looked like. I remember it very well. Now, there have been lots of books about the Baghdadi Jews. This is not a group that is unknown, but none of them have been really academic. And the book that we've just done is academic and shows different aspects of the community in different places and stresses their what we call super diversity, the huge heterogeneity within this small community. There have even been plays in London called Calcutta Kosher by an ex-Calcutta lady called Shelley Silas. And this was on London's Broadway, but it was London's West End show called Calcutta Kosher. So the Baghdadi Jews are known, certainly. Here are the contents of the book, and you'll see that it is very academic. The first part talks about the sociological and historical perspectives of this group under the Raj. The second part specializes in diversified religious life. The third part is on the Baghdadis of Maharashtra, which of course includes what was then Bombay, today Mumbai, and Pune, and delves into formal and informal education. And then we do the same in the Baghdadis of Bengal, talking about formal and informal education, talking about the Jewish girls' school, and also informal education like sport. And then the fifth part is about print and digital dissemination. This is very important. There was a large Jewish press in India publishing books and pamphlets and newsletters in Judeo-Arabic, which is the language. It's like Yiddish for European Jews. It's the language of the Iraqi Jews in India and all over the world. And the final chapter is on what we call archival cartographies in a wonderful archival digital collection that Jael Silliman has set up. So, as I mentioned, the Baghdadis didn't just come from one place. They came from what today is Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Bukhara, and even Yemen, and congregated in India and made up this community that we today call, quickly, the Baghdadis. The first Jew who came from what today is Iraq, came from Basra, and he came to Surat in the 18th century. And this is a photograph of the Jewish cemetery at Curator in Surat, where indeed quite a few Baghdadi Jews are buried. And this cemetery is still visible, and it's in Gujarat. But then, in 1832, David Sassoon moved to what was then Bombay. He's the person in the middle with that wonderful Arabic turban and dress. And on the left, you can see his sons, Elias Sassoon and Albert Sassoon, also dressed quasi-Arabic dress. But on the right already, you see another son, Sassoon David, in British garb, looking quite the British gentleman without even head covering, which was a must for Orthodox Jews in all over the world, but also from Baghdad. So the fascinating thing about David Sassoon is that he settled in Bombay and very quickly amassed a huge fortune and spread out his many sons in different parts of India and indeed the world. And they effectively ran the largest multinational corporation of the time. David Sassoon was also a great philanthropist, and it is said that he gave 10% of his earnings to charity and public causes. One of the famous ones that's still standing in Bombay is what's called the David Sassoon Library and Reading Room, which was founded in 1847, but in fact was built earlier on. And this is one of the edifices which remains with us. The Magen David Synagogue and the huge compound is named after David Sassoon. And this was, the whole compound was built in the 1857, 1860s. And you can see already the start of the influence of British architecture with a little steeple above the synagogue, which you don't see in many other countries outside the British Empire. So inside, you have a beautiful synagogue, which is very typical Sephardi Iraqi synagogue. And these are Torah scrolls. Torah is the 5 books of the law, of the Jewish law, read by Jews each week, each Saturday, and also on Thursday. Every week, Jews open this and read it in Hebrew. And these particular items, on the left, you see the Torah scrolls, and on the right, you see a chair in honor of Elijah, the prophet. And these are actually now in a Babylonian heritage center in Israel, where they're trying to preserve Baghdadi heritage and memories, both from India and from the larger Baghdadi world. So at some point, the Sassoons and the richer, more wealthier Baghdadi families started moving out or placing representatives in different countries. So some of the Sassoons were placed in Hong Kong and in Shanghai and in Rangoon, also in Calcutta, relatives of the Sassoons. And some of the descendants were sent to the UK to start up enterprises there. And in fact, the enterprises of the Sassoons themselves were absolutely enormous. The E.D. Sassoon and Company Banking and Property was founded by Elias D. Sassoon and was a huge enterprise. The Sassoon Spinning and Weaving Company in Mazgaon in Bombay had 15,000 employees and was the largest spinning mill in Asia. And the Sassoons built the Sassoon docks and so on. And they began to negotiate a huge multinational world, including the opium trade from Shanghai, which was at the time legal, and trading in raw cotton to Britain. And they made an absolute fortune, which, by the way, they also lost later on. So I'm just giving you examples that they powwowed with the Raj. And this is a statue of the Prince of Wales presented by Sir Albert Sassoon. It's from a sketch by a famous British artist. And this is the famous Kalagoda, equestrian statue of King Edward VII. And it commemorates the visit of the Prince of Wales. And it's rumored that actually the person who gave the money for this wonderful statue, Sir Albert Sassoon, wasn't actually there at the unveiling because it was the day of the yard site, the day of mourning for his father, David Sassoon, who had passed away. And this anniversary is once a year. And the Sassoons in general were very Orthodox Jews. But by the time one of his sons had gone to England, some of them had already intermarried with British aristocracy, and one had intermarried with the Rothschild family. And even the Sassoon family was marked by a huge amount of what we call super diversity. In the compound of the Magen David Synagogue, there is the Sir Jacob Sassoon High School. And what's so interesting about it is that it used to cater for all Jewish students, pupils at the time until before independence. But nowadays, 98 or 99% of the student population are Muslim. And you'll notice that I've just done an arrow just to point out the Muslim garb of these students, except that the Sassoon Trusts are happy to continue to support the Muslim students. And relations between Muslims and Jews in India were always very harmonious. There's another school that one of the Sassoon family, the famous Sassoon families, set up called the Eli Kudori School. And there were indeed many schools and hospitals that they set up, which will be familiar to people who live today in Mumbai. Of course, the Knesset Eliyahu Synagogue was an absolute landmark in Fort, and it used to be known as the Blue Synagogue. But 2 years ago, it changed its color as it got renovated in 2018. And now it looks like this magnificent photograph by Noshir Gobai of the interior of the Knesset Eliyahu Synagogue. And the inauguration of this magnificent monument was in February 2019. I had pointed out this little steeple at the Magen David Synagogue, but there's also a more famous steeple in a synagogue set up by the Sassoons, the Ohel David Lal Synagogue in Pune. And there the synagogue looks absolutely like a British church. There's no question about it. But it's named after David Sassoon, and this is where David Sassoon had his summer residence, like many of the British, particularly during the monsoon period. This was an invitation to the 150th anniversary of the synagogue in a few years back, and 2014. But it shows this Ohel David synagogue and this amazing steeple. And now we turn to another very big center for Baghdadi Jews in India, in Calcutta. These are old artists' depictions of Jews in Calcutta. As I mentioned, the Calcutta Jews used to put out lots of literature, both liturgical literature and newsletters. One of them is called the Jewish Gazette, Ferach, and it reports on news of what's going on back home, as it were, in Baghdad. But the Baghdadi Jews in Baghdad would receive this newsletter and know what's going on in the more modern society of Calcutta and India, where people were freer to express their religion. In Calcutta, too, we have a synagogue called Magen David Synagogue, also with a steeple, similar type of architecture, except slightly more oriental. And at one time, there were 8 synagogues working in Calcutta. And today, the situation is quite different. Of course, with COVID, everything is shut. But only a year or two ago, there were 2 major synagogues, Magen David and Betel, which were competing with each other for a minyan. That means just 10 men. And they often filled that minyan with foreign tourists who came back to see the synagogues. This is the restored Betel synagogue, also beautifully restored. And this is a picture from December 2017. They are magnificent structures. Unfortunately, they are empty. We found this a very interesting photograph, and it appears in the book. Most of the photographs here appear in the book, except for my own ones. And this was lent to us and given permission to use by Ramy Lana Sondek, of American servicemen who came to Calcutta in 1944 and were graced with hospitality by Lady Ezra. Here they are, holding the Torah scrolls in the Magen David Synagogue. And this is the famous cemetery of Calcutta, with wonderful, amazing structures, including this dome-like structure, which is called for the Geniza and of Calcutta. And it is looked after, and it could be better looked after. But it's a very poignant kind of cemetery. Now, the Jewish Girls' School, which also catered totally for Jewish girls, is also populated today by Muslims. And you can also see here the Muslim headdress and the Muslim garb, and a happy population in Calcutta. And here is a photograph of what used to be an icon in Calcutta, still is, the Nahum confectionery. But I photographed David Nahum when he was alive. May his memory be blessed. And here are the 3 Nahum brothers, David Nahum, Norman Nahum, and Solomon Nahum. And this confectioner's shop was set up in 1902, is still actually going strong in Newmarket. Now, we talked about super diversity of the community, and during the first half of the 20th century, the Baghdadi community went in different directions. Some identified with the British, and some identified with home rule and with Indian traditions. And here we have, I think, a very fascinating picture of three brothers who are playing Indian instruments and dressed like Indians and apparently behaved like Indians. But here is a famous picture given to us, facilitated by Jael Silliman from Kamal Chennai, of Hannah Sen and Jael Nehru. And Hannah Sen was a supporter of home rule, and she was of the Baghdadi Jewish community. And I'm terminating my brief history of the Baghdadi Jews in India with this astounding photograph of the beautiful Pramila, the Bollywood actress, who was actually born Esther Victoria Abraham of the Baghdadi community in Calcutta. So after independence in 1947, the Baghdadi Jews began to move out, not all in one go, but slowly, and they moved to different locations. Some moved to Israel, and in truth, some of them moved afterwards elsewhere. A lot of them felt more comfortable in English-speaking circles, and they moved to London or to Manchester even, to Australia, and to Los Angeles and even New York, and made new homes there and intermarried with other members of other Jewish communities. And so my final slide is this beautiful collection of sculptures by Jerry Judah, who was born in Calcutta and lives in London and creates in London and creates all over the world, including New Zealand and elsewhere. But I love the black and white photograph, which is a sukkah, a tabernacle, inspired by his original upbringing as a Baghdadi Jew in Calcutta. So with that, I hope that you have got a brief history of the Baghdadi Jews. And now we can turn to real, live Baghdadi Jews hello, Yael, I see you managed to get in.
Finally.
And turn to real life ones whom I see in front of me on the screen. I will start with Dr. Sara Manasseh, because the PowerPoint presentation also began with the Maharashtra area. And I wanted to turn to Sara and ask her, tell us first of all, what is your connection with the Baghdadi or Baghdadian community in Bombay or Mumbai today?
First of all, thank you so much to Dr. Shalva Weil for inviting me to speak and for that wonderful PowerPoint presentation. And also thanks to the India International Center and Embassy of Israel for hosting this book discussion group. Well, I grew up in the Iraqi Jewish community of Bombay and moved to London in 1966. The family of my mother, the late Rachel Manasseh, came from Baghdad and settled in Bombay over 100 years ago. Her father, Rubain Ani, arrived in 1911, setting up a business trading with family in Baghdad and Basra. A marriage was arranged and his wife-to-be, Gurji Jiddah, arrived with both families in 1919, traveling from Baghdad to Basra, where they boarded an English ship, sailing down the Persian Gulf for Bombay. My mother and her siblings were all born and grew up in Bombay. My father's family goes back still further, back to 1832, when David Sassoon arrived in Bombay with his wife and young family. David Sassoon is my great, three times great grandfather. The direct line to my father, the late Albert Sassoon, is from David Sassoon's eldest son, Sir Albert Abdullah Sassoon. So my late brother, Rabbi Yaakov Menashe of Midrash Ben Ish Chai in New York, and I represent the 6th generation of our family to live in Bombay. And we've always had a strong love for and connection with Bombay and have regularly revisited the city of our birth. Both my parents and my brother have held a prominent place in the life of the Iraqi Jewish community in Bombay. So that tells you about my connection, I think.
I don't think we could have a more apt person to be interviewed for this session than you. And your heritage is outstanding. And also, it's so interesting because it fits in with the PowerPoint presentation so brilliantly. Yes. So, Sara, you wrote a chapter in the book on ethnomusicology. And it was called Music Traditions in the Baghdadi Jewish Communities of Bombay and Pune, Continuity, New Horizons. What was it about, Sara?
Okay, so in keeping with all emigres, Jews from the Middle East and Central Asia brought with them their most valued possession, their cultural heritage, their language, religious observance, dress, food, and musical traditions. The Iraqi Jewish community in Bombay enjoyed a lively religious and secular musical life. Their religious life followed the Baghdad rite, or the Minhaj Babli, the Babylonian custom, and centered around the synagogue and home. Prayers and chants were led by hazanim, that is cantors or prayer leaders, mostly from Baghdad, who maintained the melodies and Hebrew pronunciation. The singing of shbahoth, which literally means praises or hymns, at the home and synagogue for Sabbaths, festivals, and life cycle events, remains an unbroken thread through generations. Writing of the Baghdad Jews in Bombay, David Sassoon's grandson, David Solomon Sassoon, the author, refers to, and I quote, the Sefer HaPizmonim, a book of songs providing more than 250 songs and hymns, without which a Baghdad Jew could not celebrate his festival or enjoy his festivities, end of quote. Texts for prayers and hymns are written, but melodies have been transmitted orally, displaying a remarkable tenacity. Melodies sung over a century ago continue today. The musicologist, composer, and cantor Abraham Zvi Edelson published the music notation for 6 shbahoth, or hymns, as sung by Flora Sassoon, my great-aunt, as she sang in the early 20th century after she'd moved from Bombay to London. And these hymns continue to be sung to the same melodies. A case in point is the poem Ki Ishmera Shabbath, Because I Observe the Sabbath, by the medieval poet and philosopher Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra, who lived in Muslim Spain. The hymn, as sung by Flora Sassoon, is still sung today. The text is, because I keep the Sabbath, the Lord will keep me. It is an eternal sign between him and me. It is forbidden to find delight in worldly things on the Sabbath. The melody that Flora Sassoon sang is the same as one that I sing today. It goes like this. Ki yishmera Shabbat, el yishmereni, othi le'ul me'at, beno beni, asur mesohefes, la'asoth derachim, gammel ledabber bo, that's part of it.
It's absolutely lovely, by the way.
Thank you. Shall I continue for now? Or?
Yes, I have another question. In addition to the liturgical music, did the Baghdadi Jews have other non-liturgical music that you wrote about?
So I'll move on then to male and female music traditions from Baghdad, which continued in Bombay. One leading person was Imnashi Majbura, who fulfilled the role of the Abu Shbahoth, or Father of Praises. He was an expert in singing not only hymns in Hebrew, but improvised songs in Judeo-Arabic for life cycle events, and he accompanied himself on the dumbuk, a goblet-shaped drum, and entertained at the pre-wedding henna ceremony, the henni. So the henna ceremony, in fact, was associated with the women's daqqaqa tradition. Daqqaqa is to hit. She hit the drum. She was indispensable at a henna ceremony and played a small pair of drums. And she had a small group of women, the ghadada, who were the chorus. The most famous daqqaqa in Baghdad was actually called Mas'ouda al-Bambaili, Mas'ouda the Bombayite, and in Bombay, her niece Gurji took on that role of daqqaqa. Now, the most famous and well-loved daqqaqa song is the humorous Afaki, Afaki, which means, oh, bravo, well done to you. It's sung caustically as though by the groom's mother to her rival, the bride's mother. And the text in Judeo-Arabic is Afaki, Afaki, oh, bravo. Ala fandil amaltenu, on the trick that you've played. Wana ta'abtu wana ashqaitu, and I've tired myself and labored. Ala hadha akhistenu, you've taken him away ready-made. And the chorus goes like this. Afaki, afaki, ala fandil amaltenu, wana ta'abtu wana ashqaitu, ala al-hadha akhistenu. Many verses, but I'll stop there with that one. An informant from Pune remembers her celebration before her wedding in 1956. She said, we had a lady from Bombay. She sat before us on the floor with her two drums, singing all the songs. Those were the days. There were also instrumental groups, or chalri, which continued in the Iraqi Jewish tradition. And Silliman Museri, a violinist and oud player, came from Baghdad to Bombay in 1924. In Bombay, his group included 4 to 5 instrumentalists and 3 women dancers with lit candelabras on their heads, and they performed at private parties, toured the country, and included secular songs in Arabic, which were current in Iraq at the time. I'd like to go on to recordings made in Bombay of Jewish religious songs. The Hebrew record label in 1937 featured singers and instrumentalists from the Iraqi Jewish community, organized by Abid David, and include the mandolin expert and multi-instrumentalist, that's Isaac Jacob David Dandaker, who was known as David Saab in Indian film. And on the King Records label in 1940, this featured Bene Israel's song led by Simeon Karilker, accompanied by 4 instrumentalists who together represented the Bene Israel, Persian and Baghdad Jewish communities in Bombay. On it, Faizullah Hanukkah Tagioff, originally from Samarkand, and a leading mandolin player in Hindi film, plays on these recordings. And as I've mentioned before, maybe the interrelationship of the Bene Israel with Iraqi and Persian communities in Bombay may be considered unusual, but was not unknown.
Yes, it's very, very interesting because both in Bombay and in Pune and in Calcutta, the Bene Israel, which is the largest Jewish community in India, was separate from the Baghdadi community. And often the Bene Israel claimed that they were suffered inconvenience at the hands of the Baghdadi Jews. And yet, despite this, and despite the separation between these communities on the basis of color, caste, whatever we want to call it, economic standing, there were instances of cooperation. And you have pointed out very brilliantly one of these where groups were playing together. Dandaker was a Ben Israel and Karilka was a Ben Israel. It's extremely interesting.
I'd like to, excuse me, ladies, this is also so wonderful and so interesting, but I'm sure our viewers have questions and comments. In fact, there are a couple that I will read in a second, but if our viewers would like to ask questions, you can put them in the question and the comment box on the webcast link, and we will be reading them out later. In the meantime, one viewer has written that the singing was magical. And another one asks, how integrated were the Baghdadi Jews with the other communities there? I'm assuming that he meant with the other communities in Bombay, but maybe in Kolkata as well, and in other places
With
as well.
with due respect, if I may now move to my next interview, and then we'll take all the questions at the end with respect. Sara, your music was magical and you are magical. And now I move over to Dr. Jael Silliman from Calcutta so that we get the whole span of this thing. Now, Jael, I understand that you are a relative of General Jacob, the late General Jacob. So would you like to explain to us your origins?
First, lovely to be with all of you. Thank you for having me on. And Sara, it was wonderful to listen to you, and lovely to see your slides also, Shalva. Actually, my father's family came in 1792 to Calcutta. They were the first Jews to come to the city, and he came as a trader, and he traded in precious gems, and actually traded with many of the princely states up and down India, and was most famed actually for weighing the Kohinoor diamond. He was asked by Maharaja Ranjit Singh to do that. And of course, he said, this is such a priceless diamond that it has no price at all. It'll either be given in love or taken in war. And indeed, he was right. Very soon, because he did so well over here, he asked his other family members to come over. And by 1810 or 1822, 1820s, there was a small community enough to have take a residence from an Armenian gentleman to make our first prayer hall or synagogue. So that my father's family was from Halep, from Aleppo, Syria. So many of the Calcutta Jews, though we call ourselves Baghdadi, are in fact from Syria, though the majority came from Baghdad. We're called Baghdadis because we followed the liturgy, as Sara said, of Baghdad, but we came from many parts of the Middle East. My mother's family came from Basra, and they came much later than my father's family, and they came as very small traders. In terms of General Jacob, my grandmother and him are half brothers. My grandmother was born from the first wife who died after having many children. Her husband married again, and Uncle Jackie is from the second wife, so they're half brothers. So he was more like my father's age, so we used to call him Uncle Jackie.
That's very interesting. Now, Jael, you wrote actually 2 chapters in the book. You're the only person who wrote 2 chapters. One was on the Jewish Girls' School in Calcutta, and the other one is on this amazing archive, digital archive that you've set up. And so I want to speak 2 seconds about the Jewish Girls' School and then move on to the archive. What is happening today with the Jewish Girls' School? We've pointed out that there are no Jewish girls anymore. But what is the situation today?
So the Jewish Girls' School today is flourishing. It has 1,500 students. When it was a Jewish girls' school with mostly Jewish kids in the 1860s, one of the first girls' schools in the city, there were not even 100 children in the school, and it was only Jewish kids. So there hasn't been a Jewish girl in the school since, I think, 1980s, but it's a flourishing school and really contributes to the learning of first-generation Muslim girls. And it happens to be Muslim. It wasn't planned that way, but these girls do very well. And it's wonderful to see these girls whose parents come for them with their burqas, wearing blazers, with the Magen David shield in the Jewish girls' school, who can sing also many Hebrew songs. So it's a wonderful school.
It's completely fascinating, and a model for the rest of the world to know this. And now I'd like to ask you about your digital archive. What is that?
I grew up in Calcutta in the Jewish community, which till 1970s was about 600 people. I moved to study in the States and lived in the States for about 30 years, whereas a faculty member in a university, and then worked with the Ford Foundation. I came home about 10 years ago and found that our community was really dwindling. There were barely 20 or 30 Jews left in the city. And I was concerned that the story, our narrative, would no longer be known in the city and without. So I actually worked with a team of people, largely from Jadavpur University, the School of Cultural Texts and Studies, to try and document our community. Unfortunately, there weren't many documents of the Jewish community available to me here in Kolkata. So I worked worldwide, contacting, through my mother, Jewish people we knew mostly in Australia, Canada, England, the US, UK, to send me and any of their documents, their histories, their photographs, their recipes, their music, their memories, to create this digital archive, which is actually pretty huge, and it keeps growing. So I just wanted to mention two things because it's an ongoing project. So, for example, it was a book that's been published this year by Aleph Press called Plasi, by a very well-known Indian author who happens also to be a friend of mine, Sudeep Chakravarti, who told me that in his work, he came across a document where the first Jew, Abraham Jacob, was an agent of the British East India Company, and with Khwaja Aratun had helped providing relief to the British during the after the Battle of Plassey. So that's really interesting because though there was no Jewish community, there were already Middle Eastern Jews in India way before we thought the Jewish community started. A gentleman from Israel, a professor, also came to Calcutta quite recently, maybe 2 years ago, and he contacted me because he wanted to find the grave of Joseph Abraham Shalom Joseph. And he said he was from 1883 to 1911 are his dates. I didn't know who the person was. We searched for his grave and found it because he knew he was buried in Calcutta. And he told me he was so famous and so well known across Jerusalem, not because he was the person who in 1909 gave the funds for the first synagogue in Hebron and another synagogue in Jerusalem in 1911. And his children, in his honor, gave the yeshiva, the famous yeshiva, Joseph Barak Yeshiva, to Jerusalem. So it's really exciting for me because this gentleman was not even on the map here in Calcutta. So it continues to grow, and I think the archive has brought a lot of interesting history back to a very broad public.
Well, thank you. And I understand, just one last minute, I understand that you recently have published a book. Can you tell us about that in one sentence?
It's a new book. It's not about the Calcutta Jewish community because I'm interested in Calcutta history generally. It's called Adda, the College Street Coffee House, and it tells the intellectual, political, and social history of Bengal from 1950s, mostly 1940s, to about the 1980s through 26 very famous, iconic people who went to this fabulous coffee house.
So, Jael, I think you've done more than anybody else to preserve the heritage of the Jews of Calcutta. I'd like to thank my two wonderful interviewees and also contributors to the book. And now I would like to revert to Rony Yedidia Clein from the Israeli Embassy, and perhaps you will moderate the questions. Thank you.
Sure. So we have had a couple of new questions coming in. One of them is directed to Dr. Manasseh, and it's asking, has the Baghdadi liturgical and non-liturgical music incorporated influences from local music traditions? Is this influence still present?
Influences into the liturgical music. Thank you. Really, the only one I could find was a song that we sing on Simchat Torah, which is the rejoicing of the law. And the main song is in Hebrew in the usual Baghdad tradition. It's called Yom Simcha, Yom Simcha, Yom Simcha, Yom Simcha le Yisrael, a day of rejoicing for Israel. And it then carries on through the alphabet. So the first one will be Ahubim, Aleph, beloved ones, Beruchim, blessed ones. But by the end of it, the person who used to sing was a Hazan in Baikala. He then started adding Hindi words to it, like Taqadwala, strong men, and then you'd shout Yisrael and that kind of thing. So there was a few Hindi words coming in at the end of that particular song. And frankly, that was the only influence I could find that came into liturgical music. I'm not sure if that was the complete question that I've answered, but yeah.
I think that's quite all right. Now, earlier I mentioned that someone had asked how integrated the Baghdadi Jews were with other communities in India. Shalva, maybe you?
Yes, that's very much the sort of thing I deal with. As mentioned, the Cochin Jews were very far away in Kerala, and the distance, geographical distance, is quite great. But the Cochin Jews would come up to Bombay to work as cantors and ritual slaughterers in the synagogues, both of the Baghdadi Jews and the larger community of the Ben Israel. The Ben Israel originated in the Konkan area south of Bombay, and at their peak before Indian independence, they numbered 28,000. But throughout the 19th century, there were lots of frictions between the Ben Israel and the Baghdadi Jews. At first, David Sassoon had a good relations with the local Ben Israel, but his children didn't keep up the same attitude as he had. And often the Ben Israel felt discriminated against. And as I mentioned, this was largely with India as a background, which is a very hierarchical society. And there were indeed great religious differences, economic differences, and status differences, and even what we call caste differences between the Baghdadi Jews and the Ben Israel. And so there were a lot of tensions there. And very few Ben Israel ever intermarried with the Baghdadi Jews.
Yeah, you have something to comment on that.
Yes, I want you to say, not talk about the inter-Jewish communities and their relationships, but I think in Calcutta, there was a lot of mingling and socially with all kinds of people. Jewish people lived among Armenians, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and there was a lot of freedom to move. They went to similar schools. They were Jewish schools, but they also lived in very mixed neighborhoods. And we really knew one another's communities and traditions very well. And there was a great deal of respect for one another. So I think that there was also, people don't like to talk about this in the Calcutta Jewish community, but there was a great deal of intermarriage as well. And many Jewish girls and men married outside and married into other communities. So I think there was very good relationships across the spectrum in Calcutta among all communities. And I think that is something that people in Calcutta still remember their Jewish friends very fondly, no matter what communities they're from.
Absolutely true.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry. Could I also add to that? For example, Isaac Benjamin David Dundaker, who has got a Ben Israel surname and who was the great mandolin player in Indian film. In fact, his mother was Iraqi. So he was, so there had been that marriage between Ben Israel and Iraqi.
Well, few.
Very few, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And just to echo, sorry, go on.
Another interesting point, which is really following on from what Jael said, is that outside the Jewish community, there's great parallelism between the Baghdadi Jewish community and the Parsi Jewish community, particularly in Maharashtra, but also in Calcutta. And they seem to fit into the same echelons of society. And there was huge commercial cooperation between these two minority groups.
There's also a question here about why actually did the Baghdadi Jews come to India in the 19th century? And then why did they leave India to settle in other countries after independence?
So should I take do you want to take the first, Sara, and I'll take the second?
Why did they come? Well, they actually came even earlier. As Shalva mentioned, they first went to Surat in the 18th century, maybe even before, for all we know. And they came originally for trading purposes. But later, when David Sassoon came, for example, that was to do with persecution. There was persecution in Baghdad, and India was a very safe haven for them. So there were two reasons that they came into India. Jael, do you want to continue?
Yeah, I'll just say why they left India because of time. First of all, India is the only country in the world where Jews have never faced any persecution except when the Portuguese were here. So the Jews are very grateful to India and have a great love for this country, no matter which community we come from. Second of all is they never felt threatened in India. However, they came during the British Raj, and it's not true that they mainly identified with the British Raj. Though some of the more elites did that, many people also embraced India, especially when independence came. They quickly turned and had Indian citizenship, and there were people in the Communist Party of India from Calcutta, people who were in the Congress Party as well. So when they knew they weren't threatened in the New India, but the New India was unfamiliar. There were two major global forces at the time. There were European Jews who had come to Calcutta during the time, escaping the Holocaust. There was also Burmese Jews and other Jews from Southeast Asia who came and sought refuge in India and in Calcutta as well. There was the partition riots, which were very great in Bengal. Of course, they were also India, but here the partition riots were very violent. And Jews were not sure what the political future looked like for them in India. So many of them were afraid that with Nehru talking about socialism and Gandhi talking about Ram Rajya, that they may not be able to have their affluent lifestyles and take their money with them. So some of them thought it would be better when they could take their money with them to go and start afresh. There was also the formation of Israel, and some idealists also moved to Israel, though the majority of our community did not move there. The White Australia policy was also around about the same time, and some Jews sought to emigrate to Australia. So by the time in the 50s, 1947, 48, 50, the community was very full. We had European Jews, we had Burmese Jews, we had our Jews. We were here 5,000 Jews strong, which for us was a large number. But by the time I grew up, that 5,000 became 600, because as people started moving, and some people also married GIs who were Jewish soldiers who were here in Calcutta, other families moved with them. And very soon, people like my grandmother, by 1971, who was very conservative, realized that she couldn't have a Jewish community life here anymore. And so that community that reached its height in the 50s, by the 60s and 70s, absolutely fell down to 600 or 700 Jews. And then it was mostly the elderly who stayed on. So that's a long, complicated question, but I answered, but I think it is a complicated question.
Thank you. So there are two questions here that are sort of family-oriented. So I'm going to combine those. And I think one of them is specifically directed at you, Jael. It's asking if you had a connection with the Nahums, the famous bakery located in New Market in Calcutta. And there's a hope here that they will figure in your digital archives or future writings. I have to mention that I know one of the descendants of the Nahum family who lives in Jerusalem and was a neighbor of mine and a very dear friend. So that's personally close to me. The other question asks if there are any remaining descendants of David Sassoon living in India now. So please.
So in one line, my mother's family is related to the Nahum family. And when we grew up, we were regulars there for Passover, especially where, about 20 or 30 community members sat at their dining table and sang and had fun together and enjoyed ourselves. So yes, we are related to my mother's side, to the Nahum family. And this, I think the last question is for you, Sara.
I think, yes. As far as I know, the last descendant of the Sassoon who lived in Bombay died some years ago, some 20 years ago. So I think though we visit often, I don't think that there are any Sassoon descendants still living in Bombay, but obviously all over the world. And I generally often come across people who will say David Sassoon was my great-great-great-grandfather, the same as mine. And yes, I'm just thinking very quickly of the Sassoon legacy, great big auction that there was at Sotheby's recently, showed you that they had moved very much out of India and all over the world. Thank you.
The Sotheby's auction took place on December the 17th and fetched millions of dollars. And in this auction, various ritual items were auctioned off, various books and holy books from Baghdad itself and Basra, and also from India, and even items owned by Sara's great aunt, Flora Sassoon.
Thank you. I'm sorry, our time is up. We do have a minute or two left. Sara, if you have another comment to make, and then I would like Shalva to maybe summarize everything for us. So Sara, go ahead.
Just very briefly, so my great-grandfather's wedding robe, the most beautiful, sumptuous ruby and gold threaded robe, was also part of that auction. And so it was actually wonderful to see it in color. I'd seen it in my mother's book in black and white, but didn't know what the color was. That was absolutely magnificent. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So Shalva, can you maybe put things all together for us and wind up this hour?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to end up saying that this was a wonderful hour from my point of view with my marvelous guests, and to pay credit to the Baghdadi Jews in India. This was an amazing community. In the space of 100, maximum 150 years, they created a niche in India, and indeed they left. But they left behind them such nostalgia, so many memories, so many good relations with other Indians. I doubt that there's any other community in the world that has such a legacy. And this legacy moves on in the minds of other people, because really there's no real community of Baghdadis. I mean, there are a few communities in London and Los Angeles, but it's just a matter of time before these disappear. But people's memories, people's explorations into their past live on. And all I can say is, I wish my great-grandmother or my great-grandfather had a wedding robe with rubies and gold and everything, but not all the Baghdadis were wealthy. Some of them were dependents, and this was a very heterogeneous community. And as Jael has emphasized in her writings and in her talk, not all the people were for the British Raj. Some also supported home rule, and after India came independent, Baghdadis also supported the new India. Today, they have a wonderful memory of what was, of India that was, in their minds, and they can visit. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Shalva. Thank you, Jael. Thank you, Sara. And I'd like to thank the India International Center for hosting this. And it's our pleasure as the Israeli Embassy, on behalf of the Israeli Embassy, to partake of these events. And I hope that there will be very many more to come. Thank you all very much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.